From Faith Forward Media, this is Healthcare Musings. I'm Dr. Hassaballa. Welcome to Healthcare Musings, everybody. Happy to have you with me. Happy New Year. So stemming from the wonderful episode I had with Dr. Hirsch and Dr. Boyd and Dr. Limhoko and Shalivia Parker talking about sepsis, a lot of things I learned from that episode, and I'm going to start sharing it on the podcast. And I'm hoping to get Dr. Clifford Deutschman onto the podcast. I reached out to him and he responded. He was the corresponding author for the original Sepsis 3 article. And we're working our schedules to try to get him on the podcast to talk more about sepsis and the SOFA score in particular, because I've seen in a lot of the sepsis denials that I deal with, the payers are now really focusing on the whole thing of the SOFA score, right? And if you don't have a SOFA score of 2 or more, or a change of 2 or more, then there is no sepsis. And after my podcast with the 4 experts, I learned that that's not entirely true, actually. And this is what we're going to go over today to help everyone better fight sepsis denials, because they're going to come after sepsis big time, because it's a major source of comorbidity. It's a major source of severity of illness. And if you have sepsis with an infection, you have a more severe case, and then your reimbursement should be more, naturally, because sick care needs more resources, right? And so if they can deny sepsis, then they can deny a major comorbid condition and then be able to ask for money back, which is what they're doing all the time. This is what they're doing. Okay. What they're doing is they're going through the record and picking not any random diagnosis. No, those diagnoses that give you what's called a major comorbid condition, an MCC. When you have a DRG with an MCC, a major comorbid condition, the severity of illness goes up, and then the reimbursement goes up, because the thought is you have a sicker patient that needs more resource-intensive care, which makes sense. Someone who has septic shock, who goes to the ICU and seen by intensivists, gets dialysis and intubated, or BiPAP or whatever, they need more resources because they're sicker and their mortality is higher. That makes sense. So if they can go and they can deny metabolic encephalopathy, and we talked about that on the podcast, if they can deny hypoxic respiratory failure, which we'll talk about hopefully later, or if they can deny morbid obesity, or if they can, which we'll talk about, or they can deny severe protein calorie malnutrition, which I plan to talk about. If they can deny any of those things, then they take out an MCC and the severity of illness goes down, and then they claim, oh, we overpaid you by 10 grand or 9 grand or 5 grand or whatever the case may be. It's very interesting tactic, and it's only going to get more prominent as time goes on. So again, what's clear when after the podcast, and then I reread the Sepsis 3 article, and this is what I want to talk about with Dr. Deutschman, that SOFA score really has nothing to do with the diagnosis of sepsis, right? And here is, and I'm quoting directly from the Sepsis 3 article. So on page 804 of the article, okay, it says, quote, sepsis is defined as life-threatening organ dysfunction caused by a dysregulated host response to infection, unquote. That's from page 804. That's what sepsis is. It is infection that causes a dysregulated host response that then causes organ failure or organ dysfunction. That is life-threatening. Period. Full stop. So where does SOFA come in? Where did they bring in SOFA? The reason they brought SOFA is because it was known, although it wasn't known to me, but I guess in academia, it was known in the critical care community that you can define organ dysfunction by the SOFA score. And so here's what they say in box 3, quote, organ dysfunction can be identified as an acute change in total SOFA score of greater than or equal to 2 points consequent to the infection, unquote. Here's the key word. Words can be identified. The SOFA score is one way that you can identify organ dysfunction. It's not the way that you can identify organ dysfunction or the only way you can identify organ dysfunction. That's not what the article says. It says it's one way that you can identify organ dysfunction. Okay, that's humongous. All the payers, all the third-party auditors, they just go through, oh, SOFA 0, no sepsis. No, that's not what that Sepsis 3 article says. That's not what sepsis is. It's organ dysfunction that's life-threatening as a consequence of infection. And then here's even further. And this is from page 807. It's a long paragraph. And on page 807, this is what it says in the first sentence. Quote, neither Q-SOFA nor SOFA is intended to be a standalone definition of sepsis, unquote. Boom. Right there. They never intended SOFA to be this is what I want to talk about with Dr. Deutschman. They never intended SOFA to be the be-all, end-all for sepsis. So this is where we can argue when we get a sepsis denial. You have to look for organ dysfunction. So I had a case of a patient with myelodysplastic syndrome that rendered the patient immunocompromised, who came down with multi-organ failure, renal failure, shock, and ended up passing away, unfortunately. You know what she presented with? Rapid atrial fibrillation. She was septic, and the life-threatening organ dysfunction was rapid atrial fibrillation. You can have a patient who comes in with pneumonia and has a type 2 MI with a troponin leak. I can argue that is sepsis. That is life-threatening organ dysfunction due to the pneumonia. Now, the SOFA table, the SOFA score, encompasses most of the really important organ systems. The neurologic system with the Glasgow Coma Scale, the cardiovascular system with hypotension and vasopressor use, the renal system with the creatinine, the liver system with bilirubin, okay, the bone marrow with the platelet count, right, and the respiratory system with the PF ratio. So again, that's most of the organ systems, right? But how do you define and then the hepatic system with the, I think I mentioned that, the hepatic system with the bilirubin, okay? But what if you have ischemic hepatitis from shock? That's not in the SOFA table, but that's definitely an organ dysfunction. What if you get ischemic hepatitis and then you get coagulopathy because of it? Okay, that's an organ failure. They didn't include lactic acid, but if you have a lactic of 12 because you're hypoperfused and you have gut failure, right? You have bowel ischemia from shock, from an infection. That's organ failure. It's not encompassed. It's not encompassed in the SOFA score. That doesn't mean that there's no organ failure. And there's a whole discussion about, okay, how do you define other types of organ failures? That's not in the SOFA score. And there was a big debate. And there was a big debate among the task force about lactic acid. I really hope to talk to Dr. Deutschman about that as well. The bottom line is the article itself doesn't mention SOFA that is the be-all, end-all of sepsis. It's organ failure. And so when we argued denials of sepsis, you have to look into the record and look for evidence of organ failure and argue that is attributed to the infection. More importantly, the treating clinicians, if they are diagnosing sepsis, you can't just write sepsis because of SIRS. You can't do that. Okay, SIRS is a good marker for infection. It doesn't mean that it's a marker for organ failure. That's what we talked about on my last podcast with the 4 experts. If you're going to document sepsis in the record, you have to look for evidence of organ failure and document that. Here is the organ failure. It's the thrombocytopenia. It's the elevated creatinine. It's the altered mental status, the Glasgow Coma Scale, or the altered mental, whatever the case may be. And you have to document that it's directly attributable to the infection. There you go. Then your documentation is solid. Okay. SOFA is not the be all end all. And that's coming right from the Sepsis 3 article. Anyway, hopefully that'll be helpful for those of us who are going to be arguing sepsis denials in the coming year in 2026 and beyond. Thanks so much, guys, for your time and attention, and I'll see you next time on Healthcare Music. Thank you for listening. Sign up at healthcaremusings.com to get every episode delivered directly to your email. And please don't forget to leave a 5-star review. Thank you so much.